at the age of 50, and we're speaking to a man who knew Michael Jackson quite well for a period of his life when he helped him prepare a speech for the Oxford Union and indeed a book that he was writing, Jonathan Margolis. And we were talking, Jonathan, about Michael Jackson as a character, and you described him as childlike. In what way did that sort of manifest itself in terms of the trust or otherwise he felt in people?
A wonderful example that just came to mind was I was in a very noisy restaurant in New York with him, and there were all kinds of people there at the table for about 16. And there was somebody's little boy was there, aged about 5, who was completely bored by the entire thing, and he was saying something, but it was kind of not noticed in the noise and the excitement. You know, dinner party in a restaurant, Michael Jackson, and the child was saying he was desperate for a glass of water, and the only person that heard it was Michael from across the table, and he sort of snapped his fingers and made sure that the little boy got a glass of water. He was just attuned. He was like a kind of a giant child who was kind of almost. It was almost as if he was down there at their level in height. He was sensitive to what they felt. He understood their needs, and which is why I never at any stage believed any of the allegations about him.
But how uneasy were you that a man in his late 40s, when you knew him, was having the sort of relationship as he described it with children?
I wasn't fully aware. You have to bear in mind this was before a lot of stuff had come out, the sleepovers and stuff. And just looking through the sort of notes, as I have been in the last hour I made back then, there was no real question of that then. It was mostly he had a lot of relationships with children who he had known earlier. I remember we were in his hotel suite, and Macaulay Culkin knocked on the door. It was at the Lanesborough in London. I actually left them sort of lying on their duvet, kind of reading kids' comics. But, you know, Michael then was 40. Macaulay Culkin was in his 20s, so it looked odd. But I didn't actually see any of the sort of things that reported, the slightly weird sleepovers and stuff.
Let's turn then to the music and the stardom, because I mean that is what most people will remember Michael Jackson for. I mean,
I hope so. Yeah.
What was it about him, and was that clear when you were with him?
Yeah. The thing, one of the many things that all sort of comes to mind now, because you know I haven't met him for several years. The thing that when I first met him in Japan in the 80s and then later on in the 90s, was you felt you were with somebody who was not just a music star, but also an athlete. You forget how extraordinarily physical presence he had. He was big, and the first time I shook hands with him in Tokyo, he had this enormous, tough, strong, bony hand, very warm. And it came as quite a shock. You sort of expected him to have quite a kind of a cold, for some reason, you expected him to have a cold handshake and a limp hand. It wasn't like that. He was like shaking hands with a big, tough guy.
Paul Gambaccini said that he didn't actually speak in private in that sort of high-pitched falsetto voice either. Is that right?
It was not quite as high-pitched. I mean, you have to bear in mind that Michael had his own ideas. He was a showman. He had his own ideas of what show business involved. I mean, I'd been with him 3 or 4 months before I ever saw The Mask. And I just assumed it was just a myth. I simply never saw it. And we were going out once. We were actually on our way from London to Oxford.